Let's make a dungeon, but make it sandboxy. I've been thinking a lot about how I personally like to run tabletop role-playing games, and I like writing and running adventure modules. It's fun to have a plan and see how the players react to it. But I've realized that I have the most fun when I, the game master, don't know what's going to happen next. When the players and I are both surprised, that's the most exciting stuff. And to me, that sounds like a sandbox style of game. Give the players some plot hooks, have a few locations and NPCs figured out, and then just go for it. Start playing. Now, I've never really figured out how to successfully run my own sandbox game. I'm not the best at improvising, so that can make trusting myself to create a fun game on the fly kind of tricky. And on the flip side, if I prepare too much, there won't be any of those fun surprises to experience at the table. So I was watching this Bob World Builder video about random encounters, and he mentioned the idea that really got my gears turning. And I think I figured out a way to run a sandbox style of game and not get too bogged down with too much prep. Now in the video, Bob mentions having one of the random encounter tables be roll 2, and how I never thought of this, I don't know, it's so genius. And the idea is so simple. Let's say you have a D6 encounter table. The players move into a new area of the map and you have one of them roll on this encounter table, roll a D6. On a 1, they encounter a troll. On a 2, a gang of goblins. On a 3, there's a pack of undead wolves. On a 4, maybe they meet a traveling merchant. On a 5, they stumble across a half-buried treasure chest. And if they roll a 6, here's the fun part. They roll again, but twice, and take both of the options. So maybe they roll a 2 and a 5. They won't just be fighting some goblins or finding some treasure. They'll stumble upon some goblins trying to dig up this treasure chest. Or maybe even worse, they roll a 1 and a 3. Now they have to confront a troll and a pack of undead wolves. So maybe the players get caught in the middle of it, or maybe they're able to turn one of them against the other. This whole roll 2 thing just makes it so much more interesting. So with all that in mind, here's my idea. What if we wrote a one-shot dungeon where instead of planning out what happens in each room, you write up a bunch of random tables, all stuff that fits with the story of this dungeon, but you never actually know what's going to happen in each location of the dungeon. So, you'd still be planning out each room and a bunch of encounters, but you just don't know what's going to happen where. It's like you've improvised a sandbox, but you've also prepared efficiently and feel confident in being able to run a fun game. Okay, so every month I write and illustrate a new tabletop role-playing game adventure for my Patreon. And this month I've decided to work on a one-shot with this sandbox idea. I thought it'd be fun to take you through the process of writing this thing and hopefully inspire you to make your own sandbox dungeon. Okay, like every other time I'm writing up a dungeon, I start by just writing out some notes. I made a video about the 10 steps I use for creating an adventure. The link is popping up somewhere up here, and basically I'm just following these steps to come up with a loose story, I guess more like a scenario than a story setup. And so for this month's adventure, I've made a few notes about this wizard named Roshab, and he's after this strange floating crystal ore. And the player's goal will be to retrieve the floating crystal from a group of goblins called the Big Boom Crew. But it's not as simple as just stealing the thing. There's some competing elements, like a group of ghoulish mercenaries who are also after the stone. And then there's this giant flying creature that likes to eat the goblins. And this is typically how I start writing my adventures. Usually I just write up a little paragraph, just a little story about what would happen if the players never show up. Kind of establishes the setting and the motivation of the non-player characters, what they're doing before the players get there, all that stuff. So for this adventure, which I'm calling Flick Silverpin's Guide to the Great Goblin Flight, I would probably write something like, the Big Boom Goblins have discovered a magical floating ore that's given them the power to fight back against Scud Chumble. That's the giant flying monster. And in Big Boom fashion, they are planning an explosive fireworks show for the ages. But the wizard Roshab wants that ore, and he's sent a group of ghoul mercenaries to retrieve it by any means necessary. But obviously, one little paragraph like that is not enough to run a game off of, so I'll be adding more details to the scenario as I go. For now, I have my general idea, a plot hook, the main characters and factions, and a location for the adventure. So I guess technically this adventure isn't going to be in an actual dungeon like the title of this video suggests. The main location is a quarry where the Big Boom Goblins are digging out rare stones from the earth to make crazy explosions. So not technically a dungeon, but I guess technically it is a sandbox. A quarry is just a big sandbox, right? Anyway, the next step is to add some details to this location. So I'm going to divide up this quarry into two parts, the upper edge and the pit. The players won't be entering this adventure like they would enter a dungeon. They can approach the edge of the quarry from any point, but they have to go through at least one part of the edge area to get into the pit where the floating stone is. Now, I should say sometimes it's easier for me to start by sketching out a map. It's not totally necessary for the process, but it helps me think of some fun features the location might have. This map is just a sketch. It'll get redrawn and made to look all awesome and fun for the final book. But really all I'm doing here is just making a list of locations around the edge of the quarry. I'm actually describing them like dungeon rooms, but they aren't in any specific order. You know, there's stuff like this watchtower, the big pulley, the cluck cluck pin, and the boom burrow. Each location has a purpose, mostly some use for the goblins mining out the quarry. You know, it has to fit with the story of this location, right? So there's the big pulley that's used to raise and lower stuff in and out of the pit. The cluck cluck pin is where the goblins keep their egg-laying chickens. You know, you get the idea. So we've got a little more detailed with the location by adding room descriptions or like area descriptions. Next up is the fun part. It's making the random encounter tables. So for this adventure, I'm going to make a table for the edge area and then a separate one for the pit. Depending on which area the players are exploring, they'll have different encounters. And I'm basically coming up with a list of fun NPCs that will be roaming around the quarry doing their thing. So for the edge, I'm writing stuff like onlookers, a group of people from the nearby town have come to watch the fireworks show, or specks, a nearsighted goblin falls into the pit, or one of them will be Scud Chumble attacks. It doesn't all have to be NPCs though. You could add some encounters that are more like events. Could be simple like the players roll a 2 and it begins to rain. Or they roll a 10 and there's an explosion. And the fun part of all this, the thing that makes it sandboxy and interesting to run, is that none of these encounters are location specific. So they can change and have different outcomes based on where they occur and what the players are doing at that location. So for example, let's say the players want to use the big pulley to get into the pit. They come up with a plan to distract the goblin that's controlling the pulley so they can use it to sneak down. I'd have a player roll for a random encounter. Maybe they roll and get the nearsighted goblin that falls into the pit, so their distraction works and the goblin using the pulley falls. Maybe some of the other goblins see it and it looks like the players pushed the goblin. Or maybe they roll and Scud Chumble attacks. It might eat up the goblin that's controlling the pulley, or maybe the monster causes such a big distraction on the other side of the quarry that it makes it easier for them to sneak down into the pit. So hopefully you can see by writing up these random tables, combining them with set locations, I've written a true sandbox. I really don't know how the scenario is going to play out. It's not just a pass or fail adventure. You know, the players get to approach it however they want, and we can all be surprised at the outcome. Now, honestly, when I first started writing this adventure, I thought it was going to be way more work preparing all of this stuff. But by having these simple locations mapped out and then adding the random encounters on top, it somehow actually makes it much easier to come up with all this stuff. And I think the really cool thing is that it's going to be fun to run this adventure multiple times. It'll never play out the same way twice. This new method has kind of invigorated my creativity, and I've just been having so much fun coming up with weird NPCs that can show up and not have to worry about how they are tied to a specific location. You know, it's like, what happens when Big and Boom, the two goblin weirdos, run into the players at the Cluck Cluck Pin? Or what happens when the players discover the ghoul mercenaries are trying to sabotage the Boom Burrow? What happens when the players have to roll two options, all chaos breaks loose? It just feels really cool to feel prepared and know the motivations of all the NPCs and what's happening in this location, but also not knowing what's happening in this location. And then when the players get involved and start making decisions, it's just going to open up this adventure in so many fun and surprising ways. I just hope that this method inspires you a little bit and you give it a shot coming up with a sandbox dungeon. Just come up with an interesting scenario with a few different factions, write up a location with a bunch of individual areas, then make some random tables and fill them with NPCs and random events, and then have fun playing. I'm loving working on this one-shot sandbox adventure. If you'd like to check out the finished version of The Great Goblin Flight when it comes out later this month, consider becoming a patron. The link is down in the description. It's a great way to support the channel so I can keep making videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!